Sean, welcome to 100 Huntley Street.
Rob, thanks for having me. Treat to be here.
You know, Sean, now your dad, Josh McDowell, he set out to disprove Christianity, but then ended up finding its truth in Jesus Christ. Your story is a bit different.
Yes.
You were a Christian teenager, but then had serious doubts about Christianity.
I did. So I was actually a student in the university, and I think I must have been about 19 years old. And this is mid-90s, when people are just having access to the internet kind of on a desktop computer. And I had gotten online and I was just searching around different things and began searching kind of apologetics and evidence. And I found what was kind of the secular web, this atheist web, really began responding to my father's book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, chapter by chapter. I mean, honestly, growing up, I probably kind of thought someone wasn't a Christian because they just hadn't read Evidence Demands a Verdict or More Than a Carpenter. Like, how hard is it? Here's the evidence, it makes sense. And then all of a sudden I'm reading some really smart people, some doctors, some lawyers, philosophers, historians, going chapter by chapter, pushing back very thoughtfully on the arguments that my father had made. Now, 2 decades later, I look back at this and I see through those arguments. But at that time, when I'm 19, I'm trying to figure out my own identity, my own world, what I believe. It was unsettling to learn. For example, one of the questions was this idea that Christianity, there's nothing unique about Christianity in the person of Jesus, that it's based on this copycat religions like the Da Vinci Code and Zeitgeist, and that there are these dying and rising gods long before the time of Christ. I heard that and was like, oh my goodness, what if Christianity's not true? What if Jesus isn't the unique Son of God? It wasn't just intellectual game for me. I remember lying in bed kind of feeling the weight of like, wow, if I don't embrace this faith everyone accepts me to, this is the big change in my life.
Now, those doubts obviously then led you to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Conversation with Dad.
I
Tell us
did.
about that. How did that go?
So my dad, I think many of your audience is familiar with my father. I mean, he's written 150 books, 27,000 lectures. He's spoken to more young people live, really defending the Christian faith than anybody in history. So I come along at 19 going, yeah, I don't know if I buy this. And I have a great relationship with my parents, but there's this dynamic like, how's he gonna respond? What does this mean? And we were in Breckenridge, Colorado at a small restaurant there. I still remember it. Asked him if we'd go out for coffee, and there's just something I want to share with him. And we just kind of sat down. I said, Dad, I want to be honest with you. I'm not sure that I'm convinced Christianity is true. Not knowing what he was going to say. I'm not kidding, Rob, no hesitation. He looks at me and he goes, son, I think that's great. And I remember going, like, am I missing something? Did you hear? I don't know that I buy this faith you've raised me in. And looking back, I don't think I rejected it. I think I was just really on shaky ground, not sure, and I was willing to commit to it and really believed it. He goes, I heard exactly what you said. He goes, look, I've raised you above all else to seek and follow truth. You can't live your life on my convictions. You have to know what you believe is true and be willing to follow it. Then he gave me a couple interesting pieces of advice. He said, don't walk away from what we trained you in and in the Christian truth unless you're persuaded it's false. He said, make truth the guiding principle of what you follow. He said, because I see a lot of kids who rebel, where they give up their beliefs for different reasons. He said, only give it up if you're really persuaded it's not true. And he said something like, you know, I'm here to help you. Obviously, if you want my help, and you know your mom and I will love you no matter what. And in some ways, looking back at this, I don't want to over-dramatize that moment in my life because there were a lot of moments that were key, but that was a significant moment that really made me realize, okay, my parents love me. I really do need to commit myself to truth and follow it wherever it leads, and really got me kind of curious, going, all right, I'm going to read other religious texts. I'm going to study other books that say Christianity is false. And I got to really decide, not just because the family I was raised in, what if I was raised Muslim? What if I was raised in an atheist family? I got to believe what I think is true and go for it.
So for Sean, when did Christianity make sense to Sean?
So I think even after that, it wasn't like a moment of just, bam, it makes perfect sense. I think it was kind of deconstructing certain things, and I wouldn't have ever said I rejected my faith. I never went that far. it was just a step back, looking at all the things I'd kind of taken for granted and said, does this really make sense? Do I believe this? Why do I believe this? Mm-hmm. So I think it was an increasing step forward. So I remember reading the writings of this Catholic writer by the name of Henry Nouwen, who died, I don't know, maybe a decade or two ago. And he told the story about the prodigal son. And he's looking at the painting at the Hermitage in Russia, and he's describing how, as a priest, he always thought he was the prodigal son. And then he's looking at this, he goes, oh my goodness, as I read the story, I'm the older son. I was just as lost as the prodigal son was, but lost in doing good and being righteous and being the older son who's always been loyal. But when I read that book and I read that story shortly after this conversation with my father, it was like, oh my goodness, that's me. Like, I've been the good kid. I haven't rebelled. I haven't done the big sins. So I felt like, yeah, I kind of need Jesus, but I'm better than a lot of other people because I haven't done those sins. And that was a moment where I thought, oh my word, I need God's grace in my life just as much as anybody does. In fact, maybe more, because I think I don't need it. So that was a kind of moment where I think kids whose faith lasts, there really is a moment and a real experience of grace. You have to know that it's true, but where you realize this could be a kid who's 7. In my case, I was probably 19 or 20, starting to go, oh my goodness, like I am just as lost like the older son as anybody who's done these great, sins that we classify. And I think that was one of the steps that was like, wow.